You will find us going back and forth between myself and Ms. Suda, being a lively demonstration of distributed leadership. Just a quick introduction about Universal American School being an IB World School. We offer the PYP curriculum at the primary level, our own self-developed conceptual curriculum. That's Suda's territory, among others. And obviously the DP diploma program in the top 2 grades, top levels. And it takes me, when I say IB World School, as you can tell, I'm graying a bit, and I've been around IB for a while. And I go back just to introduce our school into the scheme of things of IB, to say that in 1977, I was appointed a young headmaster or director at Hamburg International School, inheriting an entirely British faculty in love with O and A levels. And as a young enthusiast about IB, I knew relatively little about it, except I loved it intuitively. I walked to the faculty and I said, let's consider IB. That was quite a brave, perhaps even foolish thing on my part to do. But because they were thoroughly trained, because they knew about academic standards, they quickly took to it and said to themselves, they, the faculty, said, let's have a look at it. And eventually they said, let's give it a try. And then they said, let's do it. And after some few discussions and convincing of parents, particularly, the IB was launched. We were the IB school number 20 at that time at Hamburg International School. There are now 3,000.
489 is our number. So
what's the number now, Sudha?
3,000 and still counting, I guess.
Well over 3,000. I consider myself in a minority by saying that I would have preferred that the expansion would not have been so quick. Because, of course, IB now is too big to fail, but it's also too big to really look after the original idealism, in my own opinion. But that said, at Universal American, we offer the IB. We're proud of doing so. It's a thorough program that has a very good standing in a school like ours that is a mere 8 years old, and it's off the ground with very good results. I'll ask Sudha to talk a little bit about the next item there, which is we are a mixture.
Absolutely. So just adding on to the IB school is the fact that we're also an international school, more aligned towards the American progressive pedagogy because we're an American school. And the reason we particularly put this here is because when we say progressive pedagogy or international school, it relates to everybody sitting in this room because every school in Dubai in some way or the other is international. We all cater to international communities in our own different ways. And the fact that we have the IB primary years program in the elementary school, we have the IB diploma program in the grades 11 and 12, and grades 7 through 10 we have the Lynn Erickson's model of conceptual based curriculum philosophy. And that's where my role comes in terms of training teachers on teaching and learning for the conceptual based model of curriculum. We also have an international teacher-student body. Do we have the numbers? Dr. Brandon will...
Well, just very quickly, it's probably true of many of you in this audience that you have a very diverse student body. We have 70 nationalities in our school, of which about half are from our greater region. Egypt, Lebanon, UAE, Jordan, Syria, India, Pakistan. The other 50% are either from Europe, South America, a few from Africa, and a few from East Asia and Southeast Asia. 70 nationalities. Interestingly, and it relates, I think, to leadership, we have about 20 nationalities in our teaching staff, which makes it very energetic, very creative, very challenging at times because different cultures, different pedagogies need to be brought together under one vision, under one mission. I love that diversity, have always loved that in international schools, and it's the case at UAS. So we move right on then.
Just to give
quickly
you a basic roadmap of how this presentation would kind of go through. So Dr. Brandt would give a senior management perspective from his experience over a wide number of years, over a large number of international schools across the world, on distributive leadership. And I would more look at it from a middle management perspective as to how we empower teachers in teacher leadership roles, and how particularly approaching it with a distributive perspective is very important for me to find a meaning and value in what I do in my everyday business. So the senior management perspective.
Well, we saw this morning a nice juxtaposition between bottom-up and top-down. I find myself most often in the, I don't like the term bottom-up, but most often I find myself on the side of collaborative leadership, hence our title, obviously. But I have changed, and I'll come to that on the next slide a little bit, my own evolution as a leader and how it has changed actually over time, given different conditions, different learnings that I have myself experienced and so on. But I would say, and I think many of you will agree here who are in leadership positions or seek leadership positions, that the most important thing I would say is that every single decision that you take that has been found before by many, but you take it, every single decision that you take has to make sense in line with the whole. The good of the whole, the mission, the values, it has to have integrity. That is the number one thing that as senior leader you have to keep in mind. You can't just take a decision and say to yourself, whoa, I got this one done, it's smooth, it's done. We didn't have a controversy out of that. Without looking ahead to see whether or not that decision might later on give you greater difficulty. That's number one. The other thing that I would say is, and this comes out of a reading that I did, it seems impossible, 20 years ago, Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. It appeared, I can't believe it, in 1995. It's almost 20 years old. And as a leader, at the top, if you will, I think it is crucial to have some of these qualities that he is talking about. Self-awareness, self-regulation, high level of motivation, and above all, a high level of empathy. Empathy in the sense of embracing the whole, and along with that, a high level of humility. Because of the complexity of schools or businesses that anyone runs, you can't do it all, number one. You have to rely on a whole lot of people and build a team. So humility and empathy are critical to a leader at the top. Absolutely, they're critical for a teacher. But if you don't have it as a leader at the top, you're not going to succeed. People skills, social skills, and so on matter as well. I come to other things, but it's very, very critical. The first point to me is the most critical, is to always keep integrity, values, the whole, the precedent that you are setting in relationship to future decisions and so on as the core of leadership for the CEO.
I think, like Dr. Brandt mentioned, the debate that kickstarted the whole event was so brilliant this morning. Students brought in entirely different perspective, and it was almost like watching a tennis match going from one side to the other. Each time we agreed because of the conviction with which they argued their arguments. But I think what we would approach it, looking at more, so they talked about the top down and the bottom up, but we're more looking at something of a flat hierarchy here. The perspective, because we believe it is not the question of who makes the decision, it's more about how we make the decision. Of course, very important decisions regarding the school. The buck stops at Dr. Brandt's table, we all know that. However, but how collegially that decision is taken, how we draw on the perspectives and interactions between and amongst our teachers, amongst our teacher leaders, amongst even our students, That's what actually drives our whole philosophy of distributive leadership. So I would stress on the fact it's not about who takes the decision, but how we come upon those decisions. And in that sense, my role as the staff development coordinator is not the primary area I work in is during induction of teachers or orientation. And like Dr. Brandt said, we have about 20 plus nationalities. So my role is to orient teachers towards our particularly conceptual-based curriculum philosophy within the school. Having said that, it's very critical for me to remember that I'm dealing with highly experienced professionals, like all of you sitting here. Even as you listen to this, you're kind of reflecting on your journey and kind of trying to juxtapose that with what we're trying to say here. So I deal with a lot of different nationalities of teachers who come with very different pedagogical, cultural perspectives to teaching and learning. And unless I respect and I give them the value for what they would bring into the organization, my role would be very difficult. So it's kind of an interaction that I foster, a kind of collegiality, and where we can draw on a sort of interdependence from each other. I also work on ICT integration with teachers. Technology, we cannot do without technology. Again, a lot of teachers come with different apprehensions towards technology, so that's an area. Now, besides just training, where it gets a little interesting in my role, I should say, is because I do a lot of teacher observation. So I'm in and out of classes in the school, either looking at the curriculum, how is that being delivered, or looking at technology per se. And my role there is very different from that of senior leaders in the school who would observe with the idea of a formal observation, or let's say an appraisal, versus here, I'm trying to draw on that expertise and take back to the management some key decision-making aspects as to say, this is how it looks like in the classroom. So for instance, we're launching the iPad initiative in the school. How does that impact the return on investment, not in terms just of the cost, but how it is impacting teaching and learning. So here my role becomes quite critical and quite interesting with the distributive perspective, because I'm not there to judge, I'm not there to evaluate, but I'm there to empower, and I'm there to facilitate that professional dialogue between professionals. And unless and until I remind myself every day when I engage in that practice, my role becomes more difficult. So it's primarily important for me to remember the perspective in which I would approach my leadership role as. We have a quick snapshot here of Dr. Brandt telling us why are we adopting the distributive perspective? What is the philosophy and what is the reason for going this way?
Right. I think probably when there was no show of hands for autocratic leadership, I assume all of you are faithful distributive leadership followers. You know, the thing is, there has to be a concept behind it. There has to be a clear idea behind it. And to me, that's why we put down there meaning in our lives beyond a paycheck. We all need a paycheck. We need to take care of family, etc. Desires that we have. But there's an interesting, and I'm only going to use this thing here once. There's a term. I'm originally from Germany, and I come into my journey just for a few sentences a little bit later on. I studied in the United States. My wife is from the U.S., and I've been head of school on all continents except on the continent of our esteemed secondary principal. Simone, where did you put yourselves? Back there. Australia. I haven't got there yet, right? But we have a term in Germany. This is your job. Beruf. That's your job. That's your assignment. This is what you do. If you add this to it, Berufung, then you're called to do something. You have a calling. And I think many of you know that distinction between having just a job, this is your job, this is what you do, stay within those confines of the job and do it well, and your calling is something that exceeds the narrow parameters of your assignment. And distributive leadership assumes that everybody in the end, in the school, in our case, in the school, has a conviction that he or she is part of the whole and contributes well outside their own designed and dedicated area. That's number one. So there is an idealism behind it. There is a passion behind it about being an integral part of the entire enterprise. That means that if somebody is assigned to the corridors to ensure discipline, and you walk through and don't have that assignment, and that person happens not to be there and something needs taken care of, you do take care of it. It is an integrated view of the profession and of teaching and learning, therefore. Number two, obviously it follows that we want everybody in the school to have an opportunity to create and share and contribute to the values, to the changes, to new developments, to the vision of what the school wants to be and ought to be. To shape that, we'll come to that in a moment, but that is absolutely clear. Distributed leadership implies that leaders at mid-level, or teachers themselves, and principals and directors have an important responsibility to ensure that everybody pulls on the same string and is part of that entire enterprise. And finally, that collective engagement in fostering the school vision is critical because the powerful impact of individuals we've heard about already, the example that we must give, the role model that we are as individuals. But I think we have to envision ourselves as a role model, as a total entity, and how that is felt in the culture, in the ethos of the school, in the values, how they are lived and taught and learned and so on. That the term integrity means that the whole is together, and that everybody therefore is a part and parcel of ensuring that the vision is adhered to and shaped further as new developments require it. So that passion, that common passion, those shared values, is critical to distributive leadership as a concept behind it.
So just tagging on to that, I think it's also important for us when we engage in distributive leadership practice to be very articulate and understand, come to a common understanding as to what distributive leadership is not. I did one of my assignments for my doctoral research on how meaning making can impact the notions of distributive leadership, how people, the various stakeholders engaged in distributive leadership approach it with different meanings, particularly when we are from different cultural, national backgrounds, and how that impacts us. And what came out very interestingly is that teachers and leaders whom I interviewed wanted me to make sure that we are not here talking only about delegated leadership. Of course, in distributive leadership, we do share responsibilities. We collectively empower others. But there is a quick check that just to put the paper together and to bring out just the essence of what I was arguing for, is that yes, we engage in giving each other different job responsibilities when we engage in delegating in distributive leadership, but it is not a model of leadership where the leader simply brings everybody together and says, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, and distribute it all over, and it's distributive leadership. That is not distributive leadership. So what is the little checklist that we, when we engage in this practice, can see to ensure that it's not actually simply delegating our responsibilities to others? What we could ask ourselves is, when we engage in distributing our vision, in empowering others, I always ask myself, am I an expert in what I'm trying to distribute? Am I an expert here? Can I draw on my vast experience? Can I draw on my ideas and my educational background to empower others? If I say yes to that, well, that is distributive leadership. Why is that so? Because then I can mentor, I can offer recommendations, I can kind of guide them, I can provide them the necessary support. But let's say Dr. Brandt has given me an assignment to do something and I have no idea how to go about it, and I call upon the curriculum leaders and say, okay, here's what each one of you needs to do, and I have no idea, no expertise to draw on from myself. that's just passing on the buck to others. So as a quick check, we always need to ask, and there have been situations when I'm not ready for something and I go back to either the secondary principal or to Dr. Brown and say, well, I think I need a little more work on this to actually engage in that collective expertise. So it's quite often important to ask ourselves, are we empowering others? Are we facilitating others' growth? Or are we simply just passing on our work to others? Because the important question that teachers raised is, the question is, what gets distributed, right? As teachers, we have our own parameters. As curriculum leaders, we have our parameters. What are we distributing? Just the role? Or the salary, or what is it that's coming out of it, is the question that teachers raised, and I thought that was very interesting. Accountability. Just because we engage in collective expertise, it doesn't mean my accountability goes away. For instance, when we work on the self-evaluation of KHDA action plan, I kind of, because I also chair the school-wide curriculum committee, I'm engaged a lot in looking at the curriculum perspective of the self-evaluation document. Having said that, it's very essential for me to remember there is a degree of accountability there. I cannot say X person has said that, so that's his problem. I cannot do that. Accountability still rests with whoever is responsible for it. However, your accountability kind of gets more support from the others because you're including others as well in your decision making. And the point that I already mentioned regarding support, and then we have a little video clipping of our secondary principal talking about distributive leadership. I'm sorry, Ms. Saban, to put you on spot. She's right here, and we're going to play a clipping of her talking about distributive leadership, where she emphasizes on how important it is to support others. It's not about putting a name to something and say going through the game of blame and blame and shame, but it's rather supporting, empowering, mentoring. And the minute somebody slips, right there we have the senior leaders to say, this is how we tackle it and this is how we're going to go about it. And that gives you the confidence to take that little step to say, yes, this is probably something that I can take on my plate for this year. Going on ahead, we have, whoops, I think I'm going opposite. This is your...
Okay, I'm going to keep this a bit shorter because we lost 10 minutes at the start so that we get effectively through everything. I've said a few things on this already. As a head of school, I have to confess, I started out a bit with a command posture. I got the job, I'm in power, take care. And I've evolved in the direction of moving away from commanding to cultivating. It's cultivating talent. It is nourishing talent. It's developing enthusiasm. It's developing passion. It is seeing passion, and so on and so forth. It's far more important than being a commander-in-chief, so to speak. And I also distinguish always very importantly between the decision-finding process, which has to be highly collaborative because of the complexity of our schools. It is by definition collaborative. But the decision-making process is usually a single one. And sometimes a long one, and tough one. I remember pacing up and down one day at the home, at the house, and our youngest son, he was old enough to recognize that I was struggling a bit with something that was coming up the next day, and he said to me, relax, Dad, just rule. I thought about that for a moment, and I said to myself, if I rule on this one, and I'm not quite ready, that's why I was pacing, I need to go on a few expeditions to colleagues and find out what is really going on. That is a critical requirement in distributed leadership, is to seek that leadership, to seek some of those partial answers, additional answers, new insights, objections, all of those things you have to fine-tune that, and then go with it somewhere. The other thing that I wanted to say about it is this: that when leadership is dispersed throughout the school by all, from maintenance staff to teachers to assistants to administrators, the students see it, in other words, popping up everywhere. Sometimes spontaneously, sometimes well designed, but they visibly see leadership. if they only see it from the principal or the director, or from SUDA for that matter, and they don't see it embedded in the school at all times, then they're not really going to become the effective leaders themselves that they will become in an organization that cherishes it, that sustains it, that nourishes it, that prizes it, that rewards it, that recognizes it in assemblies, etc. And you get student leadership. And as we heard the lady speak this morning about her expedition, there is probably nothing more important nowadays other than very good academic skills, good knowledge, good critical thinking, than character on the one hand and leadership on the other. If we can get that out of the schools, we're in good shape. So I would say that an eye for emerging talent, for enthusiasm, also an eye for work ethic where it exists very strongly, then to tap into that and to say that work ethic can go places. We do that. Collaboration, of course, and workshops of all kinds, professional development, so on. That goes without saying. So we'll move on to the next one.
Very quickly here, because I've been told, regardless of when we started, we still are a little short on time. So just adding on to the last slide, the idea here we're proposing is teachers need to see the value when we engage them within our leadership proposals. So it's more of value-added leadership, it's more of empowerment versus just somebody in the position of power dictating others what to do. And I've always seen, be it in curriculum or in technology, the challenge for me is to make teachers see the value. Once they've seen the value, they put the cart. I don't have to do anything. So my challenge, my planning will all depend and all be focused on saying, how can I make my teachers see the value in what we are doing? If I'm successful at that, the project is just a check off from my list because it automatically takes off. Because the idea here is teachers do things even when nobody is watching. Because they just see the value in it. They're not doing it because the secondary principal is observing or because the KHDA inspector is observing. They just do it because regardless of the backgrounds from which teachers come from, I always believe teachers are such hardworking people. If they see the value in something, regardless of the number of hours, they're just on board getting things to be done. Within our school, we also have the professional peer mentoring program. So at the beginning of the year, the secondary principal comes out with a list where teachers can go to visit each other's classes. So it can be a physics teacher watching a Spanish lesson, vice versa. And we learn so much out of it. We say, why did you start that lesson in that way? And they go, oh, this is how we do it in this part of the world. And there we are fostering that professional space for that critical dialogues to happen. So we also do the professional learning communities where teachers, when they go for workshops or when they attend seminars, they come back and they do that similar session. Some of them are successful. Some of the things that I've done, I've got more critique than I've got appreciated for. They tell me, so do you really think this is going to work? But regardless, it still helps us to grow as professionals. And I think that's the most important thing we bring into this picture. So, like we said before, it's not about top-down, bottom-up here. It's more about the flat hierarchy, and it's more about how we go about making decisions through mutual learning experiences. And most important, when I visit teachers' classes, I always make sure in my agenda that before I leave the school for the evening, I've actually communicated with them. Thank you very much for allowing me to be in your class, because I think as teachers, I'm a teacher, definitely, and I'm very private about my teaching space. The minute I close my door, it's my kingdom, right? I want to guard it safely. Who are you to come and watch and observe and give me critical reviews all the time? When I'm entering that space, I need to be very, very careful in a way that we feel mutually respected. So I make it a point. This may be a very small thing, but for me, it's worked fantastically well. I make sure that I send an email to them saying, here's what we did today, here's what I learned, here are some questions I can have, and maybe we can schedule a meeting to start and initiate some dialogues. So that communication aspect, I think, is very, very critical within distributive leadership. We are hoping to just wrap up with the last slide and play a couple of videos so that we can make it more interactive, because we want to hear from you, and I think that's where the whole situation becomes more.
Maybe just one or two videos.
Absolutely,
they're
yeah.
2-minute videos.
We've
next
got the
one,
fine,
I'll
the
keep this
wrapping
one-
up.
I'll
Yes.
keep this one short as well. This is a bit artificial, this distinction, because obviously sometimes leadership does come obviously by fixed roles. You have an accountability in a fixed role, and from there the decision is taken ultimately. But the point here of this somewhat artificial paradigm, or the shift in the paradigm, is moving towards a more flat organization where everybody feels that they are on a field in which they can easily interact and not have to do much climbing, if you will. Number two, the roles, much more flexible roles. We have an assignment, but we should think about our work well beyond our particular assignment. Obviously, there is always individual responsibility and accountability, but sharing key values and vision is more important in a distributed leadership system. And rather than the exertion of power, it is to empower everybody in the organization to ensure that everybody is part of the whole. I say only one more thing to this. Do all of you in your schools have an organization chart? The way the school is organized. Director, principal, business manager, teachers, right? I hate those. I can't stand them. You know why? Because they make it seem that what we do is fairly mechanical and limited to very defined roles. I would urge you to think of our schools more in biological terms, that we are an organism in which all the pieces play a role. And if you remove a couple of critical pieces, then you're in trouble. So everybody needs to know that they're part of an organism that is dynamic, that is whole, that is not based on structure, but is based on tasks, that is based on visions, not on particular assignments. So think of a school as an organism in which there is a lively, highly lively exchange, interchange, interconnections, and communication, in which everybody has that sense of the whole, where everybody is part of the breathing apparatus of the school. That, I would say, in summary to that paradigm. Now, we have the first one. She's already shaking her head, Simone Saban.
Okay, what we're going to do, just to make it a little easy on Ms. Saban, who is here, we don't want to put her on spot by beginning with her. We're going to give it a totally different twist. You heard it from a teacher, from an administrator. We're going to begin with a student perspective in the video.
And also
encouraging
leadership, because Simone was the curriculum leader a few years back in the school. Then I made a brilliant move and appointed her secondary principal, and Sudha stepped in to become the curriculum leader.
Hello, my name is Simone Saban. I'm the second.
Hang on a minute, sorry for that. I'm going to mute it so that we can begin with this. That's why I didn't embed it in the PowerPoint, because then we can have some control. So here is Calvin DeVish. He's our graduate for this year, class of 2013, and here is what he has to say about his perspective on how the school practices.
University of American School of Applied, and I'm in grade 12, as well as in the student council. Leadership at our school means that both the students and the teachers, as well as the administration, have a say in what the school's direction will be. An example of this, or a microcosm of the leadership style, is in our classrooms. One such example is that in my science classroom, the teacher, every quarter of the year, he hands out a survey that we must fill out about his teaching style and what we would like to see improved, or what topics we feel unconfident about. After he knows this, he will take this into consideration and improve his overall class learning for the next term. So each term is progressively better than the term before. Another example of leadership at our school is in the student council itself, where we come up with ideas and then it's passed on to the administration. Sometimes the ideas are not passed through, which is understandable. However, other times the administration takes into consideration our ideas and pushes them through into the overall school structure.
My name is Gina Sakawi. I'm in grade 11 and I'm an IB student from Indonesia, studying at the Universal American School of Dubai. I think that in UAS shows distributive leadership, as in classes we get a say in what choices or option topics that we want to take in class or our courses. Like in geography recently, we had a choice of the option topics that we want to take, and this included hazards and tourism and other options. And instead of having a dictatorship where the teacher chose what we had to learn, as a class we democratically voted what we wanted to learn, and that shows the initiative of the students and also the distributive leadership as we get to know and learn what our curriculum is about.
Okay, we're just going to pause it before we go back to teachers to invite some questions. We're just wary of time. We don't want to let you go without hearing from you, because as much as we're able here to share, we also want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this? So this was a student perspective. Are there any thoughts, any questions, any ideas here? Or even from what Dr. Brandt and I shared with you before?
Don't be shy.
While it may be the ideal way of leading an institution, do you think all institutions are ready for this kind of leadership? Or is it a point at which you will move towards distributive leadership? Because it's not a concept that can readily be accepted without a true understanding of collegiate working or collaborative learning. Is it possible for all institutions to just, I would go there and whip out and say, let me get started?
Absolutely. I'll let Dr. Brown add on to what I'm just going to quickly say, because we had exactly this conversation when Dr. Brown and I were driving down to Sheikh Zayed University this morning. There are a lot of factors that come into play, and you're absolutely right. For instance, the size of the organization itself. If it's a very, very large organization, we need to take these steps very carefully. And particularly when the organization is in a top-down model of leadership, which is being practiced within the organization. Having said that, there is no reason why we wouldn't kind of trial it out on a small piece. For instance, here, the teacher is practicing it within his classroom, and how cool is that? I would have loved to be in a chemistry class or a social studies class where I could at least say one little topic that my teacher would actually address for me. So it not necessarily is always those curriculum decisions or key decisions you make, but it's also these small little things. And when it works, you take it step by step. And I'm also sure in all organizations you have it in some pattern. But I think Dr. Brown touched on it when he finished up with his last slide, saying the open system, where in most organizations we say it's an open door policy. We walk in and but how open are the doors to get to that open door, right? These are the key questions we need to be asking ourselves. It's not easy, it takes time, it takes a lot of patience, because if Dr. Brand were just to say, this is what I do, and this is how we need to do, or in my role, if I'm going to say, everybody needs to be using the smart board 5 times a week a day, they might do it. What is the value in it? Right? So absolutely. Would you like to add something here, Dr. Brand?
I think it's a very important question, because it's also related to issues of culture. A lot of teachers, principals, have grown up in a cultural environment that might be more autocratic, and yet their own intuition and their own life experience outside of that, or as they evolve in their professions, leads them to think that the distributive model, which is of course more democratic and as a result a lot messier than the hierarchical model or autocratic model, it is slower, but its results usually have 2 aspects to it. They are more genuine, and they're usually better. They usually better sustain the institution as a whole, and they're more informed, and they are more accepted as a result. And this is, I think, critical in the health of a school, is to ensure, that's why I speak of it as an organism, to ensure its health. You have to go in that direction, in my opinion. Otherwise, you have a well-structured organization in which everybody does their job reasonably well, where the results, however, tend to be narrower. They are not as humanistic, they are not as leadership-oriented, they are not as energetic and passionate about education, and so on and so forth. To get there takes time. It takes a lot of time. For an individual that wants to practice it, and for an institution to bring it about. And you always have to pay attention to that child that you're giving birth to, because it can very easily fall right back into structured ways of doing it, because it is, after all, the easier way to do it. This is tougher. Tougher, but better.
We're going to have time probably to play one last video to show what is the most important element as our secondary principal believes.
She is actually our most important.
And I'm a secondary principal at the university.
My best appointment.
Distributed leadership, to me, comes in two parts. One is to give teachers or students opportunities to lead in certain areas, and to be prepared to let go of that responsibility. You need to trust the people that you put in certain position or to lead a certain activity or program. The other half, and the most important part for me, is to be able to provide them with the support, so they know they can come to you if they need assistance, or just the moral support that they may need to be able to take full charge of what their charge is. And generally, if you provide them with those two areas, I find that distributed leadership is very effective and gives people opportunities to expand and to develop further in their careers.
So I guess the idea is to provide opportunities for others in your organizations to expand and develop, rather than just drawing on their expertise and keeping them where they are. Are there any? We have. We're going to put this on the website.
I would like
It will
to.
be the
Yes. Is there a
I
question?
would like to know what's the best practical approach to distributive leadership where the curriculum demand is very high.
Yes. Well, I don't think there's a conflict. If any of you need to go, we won't be upset or embarrassed if you need to leave. But the question is whether a very shortly defined curriculum allows for that dynamic creativity and openness and so on. I don't think there's a contradiction. You see, what we do and what we do in our courses, our IB courses and so on, is highly rigorous. The student that spoke about an interval in that course that still has its full structure as to what needs to be accomplished. But student initiative needs to be able to flow into it. We all know we can depart every once in a while from the path and return to it, knowing that the wisdom or the energy or the passion of a student has been allowed to flow into it. And that gives the whole, I think, the additional thrust that I think we need in schools. Does that help you?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.